So one of the most interesting pieces of history is today's discussion, which is the 6-6 Fleet Plan of Japan. And it's interesting for many reasons, including the fact that one of the people involved in it, and who very much was involved in it, is almost completely airbrushed out of many of the recountings of history. But I am going to start this off with a slightly different announcement than I normally do. As some of you will know, this is the yearly anniversary of my circumnavigation of the sun, aka this week is my birthday. And I thought for a bit of fun I'd add in a bonus question this week to the videos, because I always put a question at the end of them for people to, spark off some discussion in the comments and see what people think. And the bonus question is this: which of these videos do you think that comes out today do you think is the one for my birthday? Because it's going to be one of the recorded videos of this week. It's going to be one of the recorded videos. Not live. It's neither Thursday nor Sunday. But one of the recorded videos. That is going to come out on the same day as my birthday. And I wondered if you could guess which one it is. Which one has ended up being on my birthday. Anyway. Usually, when we start talking about this topic, the 6-6 Fleet Plan, Yamamoto Gonnohyōe comes up, and Saigo Juro, or as he's sometimes called, Saigo Sugomeshi. Now, Itō Sukeyuki doesn't always come up. In fact, very rarely comes up in discussions. And I always find that very intriguing. I find that incredibly intriguing. He is an admiral in a very powerful position. He's a senior officer for the entirety of this period when it's going on. He's actually in post longer and more continuously in his post than any of the other names mentioned. He's arguably the most powerful admiral in the IJN at the time. He is most certainly a Genro, which please go and look at our videos I've done on Japan for more explanation of Genro, but basically think of them as counselors to the Emperor. They aren't cabinet. Think of them almost as sort of as extracurricular ministers without portfolio of the government, who are not listed. Or, well, some of them are publicly acknowledged, some of them are not. And who wield unbelievable power in Japanese society at the time. I've done other videos on the Japanese, especially some of the ones to do with Toko Hayashiro and Mitsumasa Yonai. I've done discussions of Genro, so I'm going to leave it to those to do it. But Itō is most likely is a Genro. And yet, he doesn't get credit. And to be honest, that's usually more something to be suspicious of in Japanese culture and Japanese history than of Western history, and it's suspicious enough in Western history. Usually in Western history, it's a 50-50 chance if someone is not getting credit for anything, not getting any publicly stated rewards. There's a 50-50 chance that they are the eminent screes, the one who's making everything work behind the scenes and the guiding hand, and a 50% chance they are just a face and a face they need to fill a position. In Japanese culture, in Japanese history, as a friend of mine recently told me, the more humble and more innocuous a person is, who is in a position of power, the larger the shadow they cast. And that's a very good way to put it. The larger the shadow they cast. So, I looked into this over the years, and I've looked into what some other historians have said, and especially some Japanese historians of the 6-6 plan, and there are some really excellent ones, some of whose work have been translated into English, some of whose work has been translated in English by friends of mine who are Japanese naval historians, and who've literally just done a translation for me so I can read through it, because I found it interesting, and I was teaching it. And I like the 6-6 plan. It's a good example of conflict management through procurement, of deterrence through procurement, and through analysing your likely opponents and their likely scenarios, and working out what you can do and what you can't do. What represents an existential threat that you cannot hope to manage, and what represents a sensible threat that you can hope to deal with, and therefore you should try to deal with, because it's also the more likely threat you're going to deal with. It's like when people turn around and say, well, all it has to be is a scenario where someone's firing 2,000 cruise missiles at you and you will get annihilated. Yes, I will. But so will pretty much anyone else in a scenario where they are a single ship on their own and there's 2,000 cruise missiles. In fact, there's no ship I can think of at the moment in the world which could have 2,000 cruise missiles fired at it and it wouldn't get annihilated. There's not really any task groups I can think of that we could take that many cruise missiles being fired at them and wouldn't get annihilated. It would have to be a very, very large task force, probably, not a task group, to survive that level of firepower. So the thing is, going, well, because you can't resist 2,000, we shouldn't have any ships, we shouldn't do anything, that's stupid. That's absurd. That's reductor ad absurdum. Reducing to its most absurd form. There's no point in that. And there are points in this, in the 6-6 fleet plan, which definitely do come from Itō Sukeyuki, who is the Imperial Japanese Navy General, chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, from 1895 to December 1905. So basically, he's head of the Navy for 10 years. He's head of the Navy for 10 years. The Navy going through a massive transition at this point. A massive evolution. And according to many of the histories you can read in English of the 6-6 treaty, or the 6-6 naval plan, please note I do call it a treaty because it is a compromise between various factions in the Navy. He has nothing to do with it. Or virtually nothing. I want you to all think about, if you are the CEO of an organization, functional, the CEO of an organization, or, the head of the Navy, and your organization is going through a massive transformation and spending hundreds of millions of your currency. Would you just be content to leave it running with other people and not have any involvement? That would seem extremely unusual. I mean, literally, it would seem absurdly unusual. And that's when you start to read the other histories and you start to go, oh, well, yes, this person would have been involved. And where does this person involvement come in? Well, he'd been involved in the Meiji Restoration. He is one of the people who travelled with Toga Hachiro to the United Kingdom. He actually brought the Naniwa back to Japan. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1886, made Commandant of the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy, in charge of training the future generation. 12th December 1892, he'd been made Commandant of the Yokosuka Naval District. May 1893, he became Commander-in-Chief of the Readiness Fleet. During the First Sino-Japanese War, he was the first Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet and won multiple naval battles. Multiple naval battles. The Battle of the Yellow Sea, the Battle of Wei Hai Wei, against the Beiyang Fleet. And so this is the man who's gone to war to make the Emperor, make sure he stays the Emperor the way they want him to, who has gone to war against the Chinese and won several battles, who has commanded the combined fleet in its first form, and who's now the Imperial Japanese Naval General Staff Chief. In 1898, he's made a Viscount, or Shikaku. And he becomes a full admiral in September 1898. As well. Starts out as a vice admiral. Becomes a full admiral. He would serve as the head of the Navy throughout the Russo-Japanese War, gaining the rank of Marshal Admiral in January 1905, and being raised to Hakushaku, or equivalent to Count. He's awarded the Order of the Golden Kite, First Class, and the Grand Cordon of the Supreme Order of the Chrysanthemum. Please note, this is a man who retains in one of the most powerful positions in the nation, yet throughout his career professes to have no interest in politics. None at all. He dies in 1914, age 70. He's a very, very powerful officer, and he sets the stage, I would argue, for all to come below him. He gets Toga Hayachiro in his position. He selects the next two officers we're going to be talking about. Because one of the things you realize in the Japanese constitution is you need a naval officer and an army officer to serve you as naval minister and army minister. And if the chiefs of their staff, the heads of the professional heads of the Navy, tell people not to serve, they won't serve. That's how the navies have the power they do. It's one of the interesting things when you start looking at it, because there's usually a naval minister. There's usually various ranks of personnel involved who are naval officers, and yet they won't serve if they're not put into that position by the chief of staff. So if the chief of staff doesn't support what they're doing, they won't be doing it, because they'll either be replaced or they'll be told to stop. That's the Japanese system. That is the Japanese system. And it's not a bad system for the time. It becomes a horrendously abused system by the time you get to the 1930s. But in the 1890s, 1900s, it makes sense. I would argue it's a system for transition. Now, patronage flows down. Patronage flows down. And the person at the bottom of this patronage tree is Yamamoto Gonnohyōe, who starts off as a Rear Admiral in 1895. He's promoted to a Vice Admiral in 1898. Notice that he's promoted to a Vice Admiral the same year Itō is promoted to a Full Admiral. Had started being picked out to lead reforms in about 1893 with the support of the Navy Minister. Now, in many ways, what we should consider as is the Navy Minister is the public face of the Navy, the one who's going to talk to the politicians for them, the one who's going to get the agreements. And in many ways, what Yamamoto Gonnohyōe is producing is the plan. He's the one being brought in to synthesize the plan to get things to work. Some people describe him as becoming, in many ways, the real leader of the Navy, Yamamoto in this case, because he initiates reforms. And he's trying to end favoritism towards officers from the same province, son of Satsuma, the same province he comes from, and trying to attain an equal status for the general staff with the Army War Council, the Supreme War Council. But again, and I cannot emphasize this more strongly, there is patronage at work here. There is a line of patronage. And if being supported by the Navy Minister, that's the Navy Minister is being supported by someone more senior. And this is where Itō comes in. You can't get more senior than him. The thing is, for the people at the top, the higher you get up in Japanese government and culture, the more difficult it is for you to voice your opinions publicly, for you to take a grand stand. The more you have to be seen as continuity, not as reform and change. And the more, therefore, you have to have others act for you. So what I'm trying to say here is we see this officer as the initiator, and therefore, to an extent, we would therefore consider him a thought leader of it. But it would be like describing the then Captain Henderson, Reginald Henderson, or Commander actually Henderson, at that point, when he authors his report on convoys and convoying in World War I as being the leader of the Royal Navy. When, yes, he provides the report, which is then used as ammunition by Jellicoe to win the argument. But Jellicoe couldn't go and author the report himself, because he'd then be claimed to be biased. Because he's the leader, he's got to bring all the factions together. Hasn't he? And that's in the UK system. Once you've got the cultural differences and the scenarios going on between Britain and Japan, there are complexities and different layers added on. So, what I would say is I'm not saying he's not a leader of the reforms, but I'm also not saying that he is standing alone on a mountain unsupported. He's far more, at his rank, the acceptable face of the reforms. Then he jumps up, and eventually he becomes Navy Minister himself in November 1898, which he serves in that role till January 1906. Then he returns as Prime Minister of Japan, February 1913 to April 1914, and September 1923 to January 1924. Often when you find former naval officers becoming the Prime Minister of Japan, they're stepping into crises. They're being called in to stabilize things. And at the same time, he is being promoted up the titles. He's being promoted up the nobility titles. He is a very big fan, as are pretty much all these officers, of the Anglo-Japanese alliance, and there's a reason for that. There is a very strong reason for that. He is considered in many ways a very great support and the chief advocate, the chief public advocate for the appointment of Toga Hayachiro as the Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet during the Russo-Japanese War. An appointment which, of course, has to be approved and supported by this man, but he, of course, cannot show favoritism to any officer. But if there is a very good case made, who would he be to stand against it? That would be unwise, wouldn't it? You always have to be prepared to understand when you're looking through Japanese culture and Japanese history of the public and private face. Now, this is not without... There are lots of scenarios around the world where this is a common thing. We are all used to the phraseology in UK politics of them talking out both sides of their face. All these things. Yeah. There is always a scenario. But in Japan, it's almost a ritualized formal part of society to have such a position, to have such a standing. That's the best way to describe it. I realize I'm not doing a perfect job, but I'm trying to explain it so people are able to reference it and sort of get an understanding of it. This is not the scenario where I can do a perfect explanation of this society. I am a student, a historian of naval history. To do Japan in enough depth to do that whole scenario justice would require just as much time as I was focused on studying naval history to be focused in on studying Japanese society, and even then, societal historians I always take my hat off to, because those ladies and gents, they have to... There are no easy numbers. There is no sitting there looking at gun calibers and armor weights and distributions and engine horsepowers and being able to take refuge in simple verifiable numbers. Everything is contextual. Everything is dependent upon X and Y and Z, and it's... As I said, I take my hat off to them. And then we have Saigo Jiro, who is the Minister of the Imperial Navy, December 1885 to May 1890, and March 1893 to November 1898. Again, he's often considered the patron of Yamato Gonnohyōe. The patron of him, holding him in position, of course, is Itō Sukeyuki. And if you think about it, the two people with the longest run of positions in this time period are Sukeyuki and Gonnohyōe, who are basically in power the whole way through it. The whole way through the development of the 6.6 plan, the whole way through its implementation, they are in power. They're in posts. This man, who's often linked into it and is often considered a great proponent of it and one of the key personalities, and is a key personality, definitely key one at getting the various the parliament, etc., on side and getting out to the politicians and getting them involved. Yes, but he takes a break in a key period and then disappears off before it's fully implemented, swapping over, with Gonnohyōe taking the role. He's a good guy. He is a good guy. He also dies in 1902, aged 59. Yeah. He dies in 1902. This photo was taken the year he died. He looks worn, but he doesn't look in the state he obviously is. But that's what happens. He is certainly the person whose mission is almost the hardest, because Gonnohyōe's is to provide the papers and the reasoning to the Navy for the transition. At least speaking to people he understands. Saigo's is to go to the politicians, to the public, and if necessary the army, to try and get them on side with the transition. He's also, by the way, sometimes has a nickname of Shingo, and his real name is one of those things of, we're not sure if he called himself Ryuko, Ryudo, or Ryusuke. Ryusuke. I mean, he has fun. In fact, possibly even the judo is a misspelling. When he registered at a government office following the major registration, giving his name, they misheard his name and he became judo under law. And Sumashi is an alternate pronunciation for the characters that his name is formed of. It's just a completely different philosophy. I can't imagine even Jellicoe, who's fairly mild-mannered, not being terribly annoyed at his name not being recorded correctly. David Beatty would have gone through the roof. He had had his own battle experience. This is one of the things you're dealing with. All three of these officers are veterans. All three of these men are capable at their duties. And after he is Minister of Navy, he also does Minister of Internal Affairs. He does all sorts of duties. He does all sorts of duties. He's always a slightly interesting one when it comes to his service, because technically he's an army officer. Technically he's an army officer. But he's aligned more with the naval side, and that's why in 1894 he's given the rank of admiral. And that's when he's elevated to marquis. He's also a genro. He's one of the publicly acknowledged genros. And he founded a political party called the People's Cooperative Party. A very powerful and influential officer. But again, one of the troubles for him is under the Constitution and various other versions of it. If he's not accepted by this man, he wouldn't have been in post. But that's okay, because they have good relations. They have very good relations. But the thing is, they weren't starting from scratch. These people had not been starting from scratch. The Navy had already been a work in progress. In fact, this is why the 6-6 plan doesn't order 6 battleships and only orders 4. Because they already got 2. The Fuji and the Eshima under order, under construction. So you're building on what you're already getting. And that's the really interesting thing to me about the 6-6 plan. It's not a Navy going, we're going to have this grand plan and it's going to fulfill our needs from scratch. It's a Navy going, alright then, so we started building this stuff. We know how to functionally work it. But we have a problem. We have a lot of strategic issues. How much of this stuff are we going to need? What is going to be a balanced fleet for us? Please note that's a key phrase. Sometimes I come across people who write about these things that this is a balanced fleet. And the answer is it a balanced fleet for the nation you're talking about? There's no such thing as a universal balanced fleet. There's no such thing as universal numbers of what work for you. If you're a nation which has a lot more population, and wants to do larger assets, you're going to need far more escorts. You're going to need to work things out. Are you a nation which has a lot of external maritime trade? Are you a nation which doesn't? All these things are going to affect what works out as a balanced fleet for your needs. Because a balanced fleet refers to a fleet that's not only internally balanced between its proportions and its forces, but is also balanced with your needs. If it's a perfectly balanced fleet, but doesn't have the assets required to fulfill the needs of its nation, it's not a balanced fleet. So if it's a theoretically balanced fleet because it's got everything in proportions, you've got the right percentage of people in capital ships, you've got the right percentage of people in cruisers, you've got the right percentage of people in torpedo boats and submarines, you've got the right percentage of people in auxiliaries, it's perfect, everything's balanced. Oh, frigate, we've got a war and we're short on escorts. Oh, you weren't balanced then. You also need more people in escorts. You needed more of an escort, a greater portion of escorts as part of the force. Maybe you needed more escorts overall than you got. Maybe you needed less of something else. It's balanced with your needs. And Japan hasn't tried to rush into this. They haven't tried to appoint an advisor who's just going to recreate a Royal Navy in miniature or a French Navy in miniature or something like that. No, they've thought about it. They've sat down. They've had long discussions. And now the reforms are coming in which are going to scale up the fleet from the force it has been post the Meiji Restoration, what it's been slowly evolving into, the nascent force, into an actual functioning fighting force. They have fought wars, yes, against China, but China isn't the threat. China is not the threat they need to think about, and they know that. They understand that. They realize this. With that being said, though, shameless book plug time. Shameless book plug. Okay, so where I say thank you. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing. Thank you for doing all those things which help the channel grow. Without you, it just wouldn't be possible. It really wouldn't be. I wouldn't be able to do this stuff. I wouldn't have a very cool book sitting next to me called Economic Development of Japan, 1868. Oh, why is it gone? This is what the trouble with autofocus is. Sometimes you completely manage to muck up the video, the camera, and you just go, oh, good lord. So, Economic Development of Japan, 1868 to 1941. Perhaps if I do this, I'll stick it in the middle here. That's better. Away from the light. It's a good book by W.J. McPherson. And along with a lot of other books I have around me is the main source of information I have about Japan. It's one of the reasons I'm very hopeful that we can fulfill the Japan trip of Shipshape, and we can do the trip out there, and we can get the funding we need. And this time we are, due to expenses, are trying to aim for some sort of corporate sponsorship as well. So, any suggestions of Japanese companies who we might want to approach, gratefully, who might be interested in supporting the Shipshape trip in some way or other, please do suggest to us. I think getting in touch with the tourism board is my main thing I'm trying to do at the moment, and trying to sort out with them things that we could do of use, because I know Japan is working on their tourist approach. We're going out there to visit naval history museums, and honestly, I see nothing, considering our standard modus operandi for these trips is to promote the museums anyway. I see nothing which would be against our modus operandi if we got some sort of support, if we managed to arrange some support, some linking up with the tourist bureau, because, you know, they're promoting people coming and visiting Japan, we'll be promoting a key cultural piece of history and reason people should visit Japan. But we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. But thank you for your support in making this all possible. I mean, seriously, if someone had told me 10 years ago that this is what I'd be doing after my PhD, that this is where I would end up, I would never believe them. TV work, books, consultancy, occasional teaching, universities, and YouTube. I would have looked at them and laughed, because my plan was literally to just go the traditional academic route. Find a lecturing post and quietly serve out 20, 30 years teaching students naval history wherever I could, write some books, and that was it. But the world has wandered along. It's different. And I can't say I'm unhappy with the idea that sometimes some of my lectures are watched by thousands of people. That doesn't necessarily feel bad. That doesn't necessarily feel bad. And when I go to things like the analytics section on YouTube, and I look up things like my lifetime viewers, and I find I've had 2.7 million. And I am 40,000 hours of watch time away from 1 million hours of watch time. And I think about that in terms of lecturing. And I realize that there are videos out there. I have got 3 videos which have passed 20,000 viewers. Three videos. And I don't think of myself as the biggest channel in the world by any stretch of imagination. When your best friend is Drakenfell, and another of your friends is Garrus the Brit, and you've also got Sal of What's Going On with Shipping amongst your friends, you know who the best in the world are. I'm just happy to be doing as well as I am. I'd like to be doing more. Trust me, I'd like to get 20,000 subscribers. Mainly because if you've been hanging around my channel, you will know there's a bet between my mother and her non-identical twin sister, my aunt, which is a family honor. My family have these. It's not really. I would never classify it as gambling. It's never for monetary things, but it's basically they have what the Christmas wages, they're sort of called, and yeah, just leave it be. There's a cake goes one way, a night in a spa will go the other way, and that sort of thing. It's more about the honor and the pride of winning, we won, than anything else. And yeah, that's 20,000 subscribers by Christmas is this year's target. Oh, frigate. Ah, well. Now, what's always so fun about this strategic analysis that leads the 6-6 fleet plan is the way most of the discussions avoid mentioning America, but they were part of the strategy, they were part of the analysis. The lines go like this. It's unlikely Britain and Russia would ever ally. So unlikely that Japan is going to be in a scenario where they're going to be facing both of those together. And Britain joined with Russia, i.e. such a large land power, joined with such a large naval power, would equal annihilation. Existential crisis beyond which they would have the capability to deal with. So, if as part of a larger war, because that's the only scenario where Britain or Russia or would ever ally with any country, Japan becomes a target, what are they likely to face from the major powers? And the major fleets are Britain, France, Russia, Germany. America is still in its Congress debating whether actually having a navy is a worthwhile investment. phase. It happens. It comes about. Every time America goes through one of those phases, everyone acts like it's some sort of big surprise. It happens almost every 80-ish years. The last one was kind of stopped off because of World War II, but you know, they have them. We have various things every now and again, and it's part of the cycle. It's part of the cycle. But with this being in place, the idea was that, well, if they were going to face either of them, likely they would send, if the fleet was being sent to subdue them, it would be based around 4 British or 4 Russian battleships and a couple from either France or Germany as assists. It'd be 6 battleships they'd likely have to fight. And so, working from that, and working out that the largest warships in the world being built at that point are the 15,000-ton Majestic class of the Royal Navy, that's where they start to come with their ideas. That's where they start to come with their analysis. And they start to work on, the idea is this: we want a strong enough fleet that you're either going to have to detach quite a large portion of your force to the other side of the world for the European powers, or you're going to have to abandon your Atlantic forces for America. We want a large enough fleet that you're going to have to do that. And, this is the important thing, and we're going to make it even more dangerous. Because as time goes on, they start to realize that just 6 is not going to be, 6 battleships is not going to be enough. Yet they don't have the budget for more. And yet, thanks to Harvey and Krupp cement armor plates and these things coming in, they work out that their 6 large armored cruisers can be made into sort of second-line battleships in a way. They're going to fulfill that role. And the idea is this: you design your force to take on a force of enemy of roughly 10 battleships. They can send that. And your 6 armored cruisers go up against 4 battleships. And they might win in a fight with them. They might not. But the point is, they hold them long enough that your 6 battleships, which are going to be individually some of the most powerful vessels, because this is the beginning of the strategy which leads eventually to the Yamato, the big ships, big gun strategy, which is always a cool one to bring up. Or, to put it another way, in my mangled Japanese, Taikan Kyohō Shugi. Big ships, big guns. What leads to the Yamato class, all this stuff owes its origins to the 6-6 scenario, where literally their emphasis on is, okay, we can't match the enemy for numbers. We cannot match the enemy for strength, for overall strength of force. What we have to do is have both battleships and armored cruisers, which are individually better than their counterparts on a one-on-one basis. The armored cruisers good enough, they can sacrifice themselves maybe, because the idea was literally, I said, 6 versus 4, maybe even 6 versus 6, depends on who you're reading. And they would hold them long enough that the 6 Japanese battleships would win their fight with their battleship counterparts, and then would deal with what was ever left of the battleships which had been fighting the armored cruisers. And maybe the armored cruisers will be lost, maybe they wouldn't. But the idea is you're raising the cost now for fighting Japan. You've got to send 10, 12 battleships. You've got to send, and let's be honest, 12 battleships is not going to give you a guarantee of victory. You're probably going to have to send some armored cruisers as well. You're going to have to send a large fleet. And the point of the Japanese is they're using A strategy not dissimilar to the risk fleet strategy that Germany does. But instead of aiming it on someone or using as a strategically, almost diplomatically offensive tool, the Japanese have made it something more. They've made it, this is tailored to us. This is what we need. We're making a force built around this structure to make it costly for people to engage. And by the way, this is not a plan which comes up quickly. Comes about quickly. This is not a doctrine which comes about quickly. I know, and this slide comes from many videos I've done about the Kantai Kessen over the years, basically being not the only doctrine of the Japanese. It's when people start to realize that the doctrine which we talk about, they are older than the interwar period. Many of them are Japanese naval foundational doctrines which owe their roots to the work of the three officers we've talked about in this video so far. Itō Sukeyuki and Yamamoto Gonnohyōe, and to an extent Saigo Judo, in terms of promoting them and getting them accepted within the Japanese parliament, within the Japanese political structure, as something which they are going to accept. If you can justify something by claiming it fits with these core doctrines. The decisive battle doctrine comes from this fleet plan, because the idea is you win a decisive battle, you show the enemy that you mean business, and then you negotiate. And hopefully you get the enemy doesn't, because the Japanese know this can happen. They win a war against the British, they win a war against a major power, they win that battle. What happens next? More and more resources show up. More and more power shows up from that other power, and they don't win the second battle. This is about winning the first battle, and in their mind they earn a position that means they can negotiate. And that works as long as your enemies are prepared to negotiate. As long as they're prepared to actually have that discussion with you. In many ways, the Kantai Kessen doctrine, the Taikan Kyohō Shugi, the big ships, big guns construction doctrine, and the various other doctrines they have are more about survival of Japan as an independent nation than victorious war. Honestly, the annihilation of Russia is completely unexpected. Admittedly, it's a benefit of the other thing which goes along with this is the Anglo-Japanese alliance. This analysis leads them down the path of, well, hang on, what happens if we're allied with Britain? We don't want Britain having too much power, so we'll set it up as a rule that we will only join a war if one of us finds ourselves fighting any more than one power. The moment we're in a war against alliance, then our alliance is triggered. Which is why France can't join the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. Good allies they might be, but the moment they join, and this is why the Russians also don't want French to join, the Russians realize this as well. The moment, if the French join the Russo-Japanese War, then the Russian Navy doesn't get much of a strength boost, but oh my! Does the world change for the Russians and the French very quickly because of the size of the Royal Navy. And that's before we think about what the opportunists in Germany might do with that situation, let alone Italy. We often talk about how Italy and Austro-Hungary do not get along. Well, Italy and France are also equally not that keen on each other. That is a frightening scenario to think of for the early 1900s. 1905, Russo-Japanese War, the French decide to throw everything to the wind, believing the British won't join in because of something to do with the Entente relationship, and decide to attack the Japanese as well. Oh my lord. Because the Entente wasn't a formal alliance. The Japanese alliance was a formal alliance, a document signed between monarchs. It had teeth. And this leads to what's actually built, and what they planned versus what they built, and yeah, there's a whole debate about some of that other second-class protected cruisers versus the first-class armoured cruisers versus the third-class, and the fact is, there are 6 second-class protected cruisers built in the same time period, but they're not always traditionally added on to the 10-year plan, which is the 6-6 fleet. Sometimes they are separate off. I tend to include them in numbers because they are constructed as part of that period. But they don't technically come from the funding allocation. And it's important to realise that. I've got a funding allocation there, roughly 213 million yen. That's roughly what they're spending. But there are differential figures for that, and I don't think that figure includes all the vessels I have on that. Because whilst I put it together from various sources, even I'm not certain it's all fully there, and I'm quite worried when I went and checked with various scenarios and went and checked good old Wikipedia, because I knew someone would do something like that on there. They've got a similar figure for less ships than I have. So one of us is doing our sums wrong. It could be me. It could be me. But it's also based on me putting figures together. And I think one of the things that might be happening is the way they're adding up ships. I tried to very much standardize the numbers for the ships to include armaments, engines, and hull. Not all sources are doing so. But, critically, I was also only standardizing on things they actually had to buy. They didn't use from older ships and upgrade and just pull it up. I didn't consider those to be a cost when it said they were transferring these weapons from this and that. So, but honestly, it was about 3 weeks of on-off research evenings, hunting it down, and I'm still not happy with those figures because, again, the Japanese honestly could give lessons to the modern Chinese about how to make their defense spending opaque. They really could. They really could. And there is the existing vessels, and there are the ones which are sort of ordered really soon afterwards. Between, very, very quickly, and there are lots of vessels which are around at this point, but you start to see this is not a simple fleet. We talk about the headline, the 6-6. Okay, fine. And then you start to go down the other force and you go, wow, they've got a lot of second-class cruisers. Wow, they've got a whole lot of destroyers, and oh my, that's a lot of torpedo boats. It's a lot of torpedo boats. And again, I would say with the torpedo boats, I have given you figures which are roughly correct for 1905-06 period, but the Japanese have a habit of breaking torpedo boats in various exercises and in storms, sometimes losing them, sinking them, and then getting new things to replace them. So those figures go up and down, as they do with all navies. So please note, these are approximate. These are as accurate as I can make them, but if you find a variance in figures you're reading in a book, don't scream at either me or the author. That the odds are we're just sampling in different months and going by different authors, different sources. That's it. We will probably, hopefully, not be different by too much. But it's quite a balanced fleet. And you can sort of tell what it's balanced about. You've got these are your deterrence core. They're your deterrence core. These, as you go down, are about your presence mission in your region and upping the Japanese presence and emphasis. And these, they're your out of context risk. You see, combining those with the battleships and the armored cruisers, that gives you a fleet formation that's a hefty formation to try and fight. That means someone can't afford to leave anything at home. If they just built battleships and armored cruisers and hadn't built any of the rest, they could have built more of them. But then whoever turns up with their battleships, their armored cruisers, and a whole lot of torpedo boats, and you get swarmed. That's it. You get swarmed. And that wasn't going to work for the Japanese. So what they've produced is a fleet which is both balanced and, more importantly, balanced with their needs. It's balanced to make things difficult for people to attack them. I also love the fact that depot vessels and a torpedo gunboat were included in this because torpedoes were that important. Again, it's no surprising once you start looking back at the origins of the Japanese fleet and the amount of money they spend on torpedoes, what they have exactly available in World War II. Honestly, it's not reading tea leaves and working out images from them. It's a natural progression, an evolution of their force structure and their thinking. The fact that so many people in so many nations couldn't seem to work it out honestly does, when you're looking at it like this, look absurd. And the only thing I can say is this. Just because you are good at your job as an analyst or a naval officer doesn't mean you automatically know about any other navy unless you've gone and done the research. Because whilst you have the skills and knowledge, they're based in the service you've been exposed to. And to understand the Japanese, like to understand the Royal Navy and the US Navy and their procurement, you have to understand not just the service but the nation they're from. The Japanese don't produce unbalanced forces. And again, this is not the force produced by a prophet. Think about it. We have examples of prophets. We have Fisher. We have Tirpitz. We have all sorts of officers who are prophetizing the future, proselytizing the future of what navies are going to be. The Junocole. We theoretically have Yamamoto Gonnohyōe as this officer who is producing the future of the Navy, revolutionary, and yet this is the fleet that's built? A balanced formation? This is not just a bit of a compromise. This is the work of a lot of people coming together and working out what they need. Yamamoto Gonnohyōe is the spokesperson of those people. He is the public face of those people, the one who's talking about it. But there are a lot of people behind him. There are. Now here is where things get even more interesting, because this was all paid for by the indemnity from the First Sino-Japanese War, officially. And please note when I say that's officially, because the indemnity originally starts out as 200 million silver Kuping taels, or about 240 million troy ounces. That's 7,500 tons of silver. But the Western powers intervene because they, what we're going to say, but it's actually more it's a triple intervention. It's France, Germany, and Russia intervene and go, no, you can't take this portion of China from you. Instead, they have to pay you another 30 million taels, which takes it up to 8,600 tons of silver. Now, in modern day prices, that would be, according to the conversion I've currently had, of £843 per kilogram for silver, which is today's current conversion rate. Different this week has gone between 847 and 794, so it's currently today is £843 per kilogram. Would be 7.25 billion. Give or take a couple of 100,000. Mostly give a couple of 100,000. It's 7,250,316,000 pounds. So yeah, that's how you pay for a navy. You have the Chinese pay for it after the first Sino-Japanese War. And this does help set Japan up for the next war, the Russo-Japanese War. And this is what this fleet will eventually be used for. And this is the fleet. These ships being built, by the way, are the core of the fleet which fights the Russo-Japanese War, and are the ships which pretty much decide the Battle of Tsushima and the Battle of Port Arthur. It's these ships paid for by the, and I'm still quite amazed that the calculator, when it tells me this, it's £7.25 billion in today's money in silver. I could buy a whole load of Type 45s for that. I really could. But let's consider that fleet. Let's consider the core of the fleet. The big battleships and the big armoured cruisers. We'll start by considering the less famous of these, the Iwate, which is one of the Izumo class of armoured cruiser. And they are laid down in 1898, May and November respectively, launched in 1899 and 1900, and commissioned into service in 1900 and 1901. They both served through till 1945 in various roles. But realistically, what are we talking about? We're talking about a ship which has 4 8-inch guns in 2 twin turrets, 14 6-inch guns, which are the killing guns of any ship in this period, has 10 12-pounder guns, and 8 2.5-pounder guns, plus 4 18-inch torpedo tubes. Has a fairly thick armour, having 7 inches, maximum 7 inches on the waterline belt, a 2.5-inch thick deck, gun turrets of 6.3 inches of armour, and the bulkheads having 5 inches of armour. They displace roughly 9,500 tons. And they have a top speed of 20.75 knots. And a range of 7,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. For their time, with a crew of less than 700, they are an excellently useful and very valuable asset. A very useful and valuable asset. And the fact that their armour is Krupp cemented armour means it's the latest capability. Furthermore, the ships, they have 30 watertight compartments in the double bottom and 137-ish between the bottom and upper deck. They are very well compartmentalized for cruisers at this time. They are highly survivable assets which have been designed to keep firing. And no, they don't have the long-range big guns that a battleship might have, or some other armor cruiser in the world. But their 8-inch guns are effective. And their 6-inch guns are Ellswick Ordnance Company Pattern Z quick-firing 40 caliber 6-inch guns. Mounted mostly in armoured casemates on the main and upper decks, but there are four mounted on the upper deck protected by gun shields. So you have a great range of fire and radius of fire of these guns. Those 6-inch guns, there are very few angles you can approach that ship. You're not going to get slammed by multiple 6-inch guns. And their torpedoes, well, they have a range of 870 yards at 27 knots, 1100 yards at 23.6 knots, or 3,300 yards at 14.2 knots. Might not sound particularly great, but it's good. And what's even better is that the 8-inch gun turret used by all the 6.6 fleet's armoured cruisers is standardized. They're all using the same guns. They're all able to do the same training. They are all armed and focused in on the 6-inch guns, which makes things easier for them as a navy. Makes it viable for them to be able to cross-train, to have ships in the reserve and still be able to train up crews, to be able to train up the core of crews on different ships, to grow the fleet quickly. They've chosen what they're building, and they've got it. These ships are designed by Sir Philip Watts, the noted British director of naval construction and constructor. And they are pretty much, you could argue, the Japanese going to the British and asking them what they could build that was slightly better than what they were building for themselves. Because again, you can afford that when you're spreading it across 2 ships rather than 12 ships. That little bit of extra cost across 2 ships doesn't add up to necessarily much. Across 10 ships, well, that can be the difference between having 12 and having 10, and if you're the Royal Navy, 12 is more useful. 12 90% solutions is far better than 10 100% solutions, because it guarantees you more availability of hulls and more reserve. And that indemnity was a great thing, by the way. It is a really useful thing for the Japanese. A truly useful thing in paying for this and allowing to do this. But then, on top of that, you have Mikasa. Which is... oh, it's something I so want to see. I will never forget seeing the last surviving British submarine in the 1930s in Tallinn, not having realised it was there. That was both a shock, a privilege, and an honour. And a moment I will never forget, and I want to repeat in my life. It wasn't quite the same for me as seeing HMCS Haida for the first time, but it came close. But seeing Mikasa... oh, that is something I have long dreamed of. She's a modified Formidable. Which were some of the most powerful battleships of their era. Armed with 4 12-inch guns and 2 twin turrets, and those 14 6-inch guns again. Might see there's a theme going on here. The real killer of ships is a 16-inch gun. Is a 6-inch gun. I mean, not 16-inch, 6-inch. And having 14 of them represents a good balance of firepower, a good capability. Especially when you consider that, once again, they have them mounted mostly in casemates. Mostly in casemates. This point now, it's the lovely little 12-pounder guns. Those guns which are used for dealing with torpedo boats. The 20 of them that they're carrying, which are not mounted, are mounted in sort of mounts on top of the deck. She also has some 3-pounders and 2.5-pounder guns, 6 of both, and 4 18-inch torpedo tubes. Crop cemented armor again, and this time up to 9 inches thick belt armor, 3 inches up to 3 inches thick deck armor. Casemates, conning tower, barbettes, gun turrets, and of course, once again, her bulkheads are all thick pieces of metal. They really are. She individually cost 8.8 million yen, or 880,000. From Vickers in Barrow Furnace. Armed with Elswick Ordnance Company's guns. And she is built to be a flagship. That is quite simply her role. She is built from the hull upwards, from the keel upwards, to be the flagship of the combined fleet. This is something the Japanese worked out. They were going to need a ship which would be the command center. They knew it needed to be able to hold personnel. They knew it needed to be able to protect personnel. They also knew they needed to be able to see what was going on around them. And they built a ship to do that. They built a ship for that. There is a wonderful, wonderful painting of Togo Hayashiro on the bridge, the compass deck, before the Battle of Tsushima. And I've talked many times about my view of certain practices in this time period of having conning towers. And they make sense at the ranges these ships were built to engage in. But I often profess that I find them a little bit waste of metal, because especially prior to radar, your best situational awareness came from, at sea in naval battles, the Mach 1 eyeball. And whilst lookouts are great and theoretically expendable compared to the Admiral will often desire to have their own view of what's going on. Yes, they might be afraid for their life, but there's also, this is the chance for them to accomplish the greatest thing they'll ever be known for. The first line of their obituary. Their greatest honor and service to the Emperor. And just like there were, Jellicoe kept wandering out of his conning tower at Jutland to watch what was going out, which is even less advisable. So does Togo Hayashiro. So does every admiral in this period. I can't think of an admiral who's actually a decent admiral, who actually does try and command from inside the conning tower and doesn't wander out when they think they can to get a view. I really can't think of one. But this is the core. This is the fighting core of the fleet. And these are at scaring ability. Now, I love this picture because it shows just how close the two classes look at each other at this point in history. Because this is the Hayabusa class torpedo boat, and this is the Murakami class torpedo boat destroyer. The Hayabusa class weighing at 154 tons. The Makumu class weighing at, well, up to 366 tons. So more than twice their weight. These at the top, armed with 12-pounder gun, 5 6-pounder guns, and 2 18-inch torpedoes, plus a top speed of 30 knots. They're mostly built by Thornycroft, but you know, they're good vessels. They are good vessels. And they are born directly from the experience of the first Sino-Japanese War. They are born from the fact that the Japanese realized just how useful fast ships can be, and how large, slow ships armed with inaccurate artillery can be completely taken advantage of by them, and that if you have a chance to deploy these assets, you can be really nasty. And the best way to stop these assets being successfully deployed against you is to have vessels which you can deploy against them. And then the Hayabusa class. Oh, these are gorgeous. These really are gorgeous vessels. They are originally ordered from Normandy shipyard in Le Havre, in France. And the first four, Hayabusa, Kasagi, Manzura, and Chidori, are all ordered from them. But the rest of the class, and there are 15 in the class, are built in Kyoto Naval Arsenal and Kawasaki Shipbuilding Company in Kobe. They're built in Japan. And that's important. These vessels, they're capable of 29 knots. They are capable of, they have 2,000 nautical miles at 10 knots in range. They have a crew of 30. They're armed with a 57mm gun or a couple of 47mm guns. It depends on what they're doing. And they can carry up to 3 18-inch torpedo tubes. They are exquisite little ships, exquisite little vessels in so many ways. And yet, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about something massive, something colossal. We're talking about something that balances their need. The Japanese want a lot of these, but they don't want to add them out proportion to their fleet. They're not talking about Juno Cole. They're not even at Fisher's flotilla defense, which honestly they probably should have been at Fisher's flotilla defense in style and state and form, but they weren't there yet. No, they were at attack wing, escorts, formations designed to give their battle fleet claws, to make their opponents second guess what they're planning. That is what these ships are about. And they're good ships for that. They really are. I'd prefer to be in a Murakami class than a Hayabusa, but honestly, neither's exactly going to be a large vessel. Neither's a very large vessel. But they're fast. And ultimately, the success of the 6-6 plan is not the Battle of the Russo-Japanese War. If they managed to deter the Russo-Japanese War, that would have arguably been its success. No, the Russo-Japanese War is proof that if you build a deterrence force that's capable enough, if you find yourself fighting a war, you could actually win it. If with a little bit of luck and, of course, the Russian ability to muck up their diplomacy, so they have to go the long way around the world and depend upon everyone but the British for their logistics. Would the British have sold them coal? possibly discreetly. If it hadn't been for Dogger Bank, if it hadn't been for deciding to shoot up British fishing boats because of your worry of Japanese torpedo boats, which weren't there, yeah, there is a possibility they could have bought some coal off the British. They could have been happier at using the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean for more of their fleet. But unfortunately, life did not work out that way for poor Rozelensky. No matter how hard he tried, he had the Kamchatka and all the joy she brought with her. So realistically, the legacy of it should be seen in the repeated 8-8 fleets that come about. And I've already discussed how the later 8-8 fleet turns into 8 fast battleships, 4 dreadnought battleships, and 4 battle cruisers. So that's more of 4-8-4. But originally it had the idea of being 8 battle cruisers, large battle cruisers, and 8 battleships. But the thing is, the Japanese are always prepared to evolve it. That's their response to the American production and construction of so many standard ships, of such a large battle fleet. Is the 8-8 fleet. The 6-6 fleet had been their protection against the world of the imperial powers. What I love about the Japanese is there is a level of pragmatism going on here about what size of fleet they can build and what it's for. What it's for. It's for deterrence, it's for conflict management, and it's for, if necessary, winning the first big battle. And hopefully making it a decisive battle so that you can move from there to a peace negotiation. Because if the war drags on for too long, Japan doesn't have the resources. Japan doesn't have the depth of resources to be able to last. And that's Japan honestly analysing itself. And the curious thing when you go back to the history of the 6-6 fleet and these other subsequent fleets is how absolutely candid the Japanese have to get about their reality. And honestly, how open they have to be in order for the deterrent to work. And this is what I think they muck up in the late 1930s. Because they try to be smarter than the situation requires, or rather smarter than is sensible for the situation. They both want to have the deterrence capability of having the powerful ships, and also have the fact that they have such powerful ships to be a secret, or at least a shrouded fact. One of the powers they're literally building the 6-6 fleet against is the British, and they are quite literally ordering the ships off them. The same with the French. And they are still ordering the ships from them. So those powers know exactly the capabilities of the ships they are going to have to fight if they take on the Japanese. And yes, there are sensible reasons for infrastructure, construction capability, all the others, that they are buying foreign-built ships and are trying to build up their capability to build them indigenously. But still, doing that is an alpha move. That's a gut punch. Because now the Japanese know that their counterparts know exactly how capable their ships are. So therefore, they know exactly, and they also have seen their ships, the crews training, they've watched them, they know exactly how powerful they have to come in order to try and win, and they know how much of their fleet they're going to have to take with them. And most estimates from most powers are, you'd better bring at least 16 large ships. At least 16 large ships. Preferably 18 to 24. To guarantee a win. Think about how many powers there are in the world and how many would go, well, hang on, can I A, muster 24 armoured cruisers and battleships to go to my command, and B, can I muster 24 and still be able to do all the other things I need to do? And that's for a chance of guaranteed victory. And if you're a major power like Britain or France, which depends on your status as a major power, the worst thing for you to do is to lose the first battle. To get to Shimon. Because then you're going to have to wage a longer war and come back and win bigly. And I am using that word for emphasis. Because you're going to have to win big, and in a way that you can market is big. And you can show is big to make up for your loss. To make up for your losing. So you have to win first time and loudly, or it's going to cost you more time, more ships, and you're going to have to really show how big you can win. And that's a cost. That's a cost. That's ultimately what the Japanese entire doctrines are about. They're about ramping up the cost of attacking Japan. You see, the thing is, people look at them as a form of naval strategy which is somehow offensive, but realistically, what they are is coastal offences, siege warfare brought to the sea. You win a siege as a defender by outlasting your attacker, by making them take time and time and time to try and get to you, by costing them time. That's how you win against a siege. The Japanese, they're hoping if they cost you enough in ships, they'll win the siege. With that all being said, what is today's question? What is today's discussion point? Well, I'd like you to think about this. I'd like you to think about what would be a modern 6-6 fleet. What would be a modern structure for nations? Pick any nation you want. Any nation. And think about what a modern form of this fleet, taking those principles, would be. What it would look like. You'd be very interested if you apply it to some powers. Because then when you look at what they're actually building, it's not too different. It really isn't too different at what they're currently professing to build. With that being said, what we have coming next week, Sir Walter Raleigh. And tomorrow is What If Admiral Henderson, Reginald Henderson, and William Wordsworth Fisher live. That'll be a fun one. It will be a fun one. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And please, if you like the videos, please do like, share, and subscribe. And really does help the channel grow. Especially as I have found that if I share things on social media, it's good, but according to the algorithm, it's far better if you share them. And if you share the videos on social media, that really does help the channel grow, apparently. I'm not sure if that's true, but I'd love to, see if it is. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.